We are recording this meeting. If any one of you have any objections, please let us know. Otherwise, I will consider silent is assent. So therefore, the meeting will go ahead with recording in function. All right, on the screen, hopefully you all can see my share screen. And if you can't, let me know. In the share screen, you have the agenda for today. We have 5 items. And just first order of business is, does anyone who wants to have a suggestions or any suggestions that you want to change the agenda item or reorder the agenda because you have other business that you need to go away and you have items that is dear to your heart that you want to talk about? All right, not hearing anything, so I will peruse with the agenda item as it is displayed on the screen. All right, the first order of business is approving the meeting minutes for the last meeting, which is on October the 9th. Here is the meeting minute on the screen. So I did a bit of reshuffling, pushing the meeting agenda to the bottom of the conference page with the meeting minutes contents sort of hide up in the at the beginning of the conference page. So I've sent out an email 2 days ago for to notify the meeting members that the meeting minutes available for review and for approval at today's meeting. Hopefully, folks on the call have the opportunity to review the meeting minutes. Is there anyone who wants to have any of the record amended as it appears in the conference page? All right, I haven't heard anyone who wants to have any of the items amended. So at this point, I'll entertain the motions to accept the meeting minutes of the 9th of October.
I will move that. It's Brett here.
Yes, Brett, thank you for the motion. Anyone who wants to second that?
Shelley, I'm happy to.
Michael Osborne.
Sorry, Michael. Mike, I hear Sherry and I hear Michael, but given that Sherry has taken the notes last time, so I would take Michael's as the seconder. So we have Brett moving. We have Michael Osborne seconding. Shane Gilbert is coming in. All right. So let's call to the questions. Anyone wants to abstain?
Yes,
All right.
I'll abstain. Sorry.
Okay.
I wasn't at the last meeting. So.
All right, Michael abstained. There's one abstain. Anyone
Me too,
wants
Stephen. Stefan, abstain.
Sorry, Steph. Okay,
yep.
Cool. There we have 2 abstains. Anyone wants to any more abstention? All right, no. Then anyone oppose? All right, there is no opposition. There is 2 abstains. We have 12. So therefore, we have 9 for the approval of the meeting minutes. Then the motion carried. The meeting minutes is approved as official record for the October the 9th meeting. All right. Switching back to the agenda item, number 2 is about ballot status. I have the ballot status page up. Brett, you want to take us through it?
Yeah, so I'll just make this a quick one. So triage continues for the co-chairs. We have just a few items left to triage to bring through. We are scheduling a whole bunch of things to come to meetings that kind of need discussion. So you'll see in the agendas for future meetings, there's a number of things that have been already listed, and we'll be kind of managing that in the meeting program. There's also some block votes that are going to progress for some things we think can happily go to block vote. We have a couple of block votes closing today. They closed last week, but are getting reviewed today, and we've got 2 block votes that have just opened yesterday as well. So that's probably good. I'll talk about it in the block votes bit, but so that's kind of the status at the moment. So we hopefully should be through triaging everything with the co-chairs probably in the next week or 2, I hope. I know there's a couple of issues that have come to us from other groups as well that we need to get across as well. But that's about the status. So we are progressing. We're slowly getting through these things. So we'll just keep working on that.
All right. Thank you, Brett, for the update. Colleagues at the call, do you have any questions for Brett on the ballot triage plan? Okay, hearing none. The next agenda item is about co-chair elections.
Yep, I'll grab that one as well. So there was a need to run a co-chair election for the FHIR Work Group. We have 3 of the co-chairs have their terms ending at the end of December. So we need to find some new or return these co-chairs to their positions. But as part of the discussion with the co-chairs, it was also decided to add 1 extra co-chair seat. So I just wanted to say, yes, we would like an extra seat, which means there are 4 positions available in this co-chair ballot. And I wanted to make a motion to get the group just to agree to add that extra co-chair. It's mainly just to help share the load and make sure we've got enough co-chairs on any day. So that's kind of the status on that. And I would like to make a motion to add 1 extra co-chair to this.
So just cycle. To clarify, currently we have 3. We have 4. We have 5 co-chairs.
5 or 2.
5 co-chairs. 3 of them, their terms are up, and they're up for re-election.
Yeah.
And we would like to increase the co-chairs numbers by 1, taking it to the total to 6. So we don't have to make any voting on those 3 co-chairs position open up for reactions. That's a matter of sort of administrative, of course. So we do need to make a motion for increasing or adding 1 more co-chairs to the work group. So I've heard that, Brett, you motioned that?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Anyone wants to second Brett's motion to add 1 more co-chairs to the work group?
Yep, I'm happy to second that.
Yeah, Joshua, thank you for your seconding. All right. Anyone who has any questions or any opinions or comments on this motion? Okay, not hearing any further questions or comments on that. Let's call to the question.
Would you like me to run a poll?
Run an official poll? So can you?
I'll do that.
Do that. Thank you.
Let me launch that one.
All right, the poll is launched. All right, so you have options. You have 3 options to vote.
Yeah, and let me know if you can't vote, and we can record your vote. I think I've got 9 out of 10. I think that might be everyone.
We give it another couple of. Okay, yeah.
10 out of 10.
Looks
Perfect.
Good. 10 out of 10. Cool. All right, so we can close the poll.
Yeah, so we can close the poll. So we have.
So we have 9 for.
Actually 10 because I can't vote. I wasn't able to vote,
Yeah,
so
all right.
I'll add
So,
me as +1, so 10.
Yep. So that's 10, and then there's one abstain that makes up the total number of 11. So the motion carried, and we will have a new co-chair position open up, making the total number of co-chairs elections to be 4. All right. All right.
Cool.
What is the next step, Brett? Can you take us through that?
So now that we know exactly how many seats we're going to open up, there'll be some official correspondence with instructions as to how to nominate for co-chair positions and any criteria that are needed to nominate. So that will be the first step. There'll be some official correspondence coming out to take nominations for those seats, and then further instructions on the voting procedures and timing as well. We'll work out the timing, but there'll be a period of time for making nominations.
Generally, we will allow a month for the voting. Is that right?
Yep. Okay. Yeah, I think that's the plan is to follow the same procedure international kind of indicates in terms of timing. Yeah.
All right. Anyone who has any other questions for Brett on that? Okay, not hearing anything or any questions, then I will move on to item number 4, which deals with 2 block votes. So I have here on the screen first block vote. Brett, would you like to take us through it?
Yeah, so I think it's
or do you want to drive?
Not really. We'll just talk to it. So I think it's more just are we accepting the outcome here. So we had this was the block vote that was run from the 9th through to the 16th of October. We ended up with having 8 voters, all affirmative, and so I think if people are happy to accept that.
So we have on the screen 3 of them. The first 3 are persuasive with more, and the last one is persuasive.
Yeah. So yeah, all the details are in the tickets, and I think that a set of those were discussed in detail with Ruben, who raised a number of things there. But yeah, so we hopefully.
So anyone wants to take a look at any of those items? Okay, hearing none, requiring the opening up of any of the items for discussions. So we'll close this one, with no need for further discussion. So the voting, the e-vote numbers as they are stands. Thank you.
Great. And yeah, the second batch. Yeah, second batch. So these. There's kind of a bit of a mixture of things in this set, but yeah, again, we've had the 8 voters positive, affirmative, and no negatives.
All right, and the disposition is that we have 1 assigned for future use, and then 2 non-persuasive, or 3 non-persuasive, and 1 persuasive. All right, anyone wants to review any of the items that are on the screen before we close out this one? All right, not hearing anything. All right, then we will take the vote as they are, and then close this agenda item.
Okay.
Oops. Next one.
Whilst I didn't have this on the agenda, we do have 2 further block votes that are open, 3 and 4. So I think I'd just like to encourage people to go and look at that. There, you should have received email on that on the FHIR Work Group list. But yes, we do have 2 further block votes. I might just drop this link in, Stephen.
What I would, well, if you want to share, I will stop.
I'm soon going to be.
Or you want
finished.
to? You put it on the.
Yeah, we've got we've essentially got that link there goes to a list of all RE votes. Now,
hang on, that link that you gave me. Okay, I might have copied. Hang on, I might have copied the incorrect link.
Yeah,
all
cool.
right, here we are.
Yeah, so you can see there's block vote 3 and 4. Yeah, so there's a number. They're quite small blocks. I think there's a block of 3 and a block of.
So these two, 3 and 4.
Yeah,
You
3
want
and
me
4.
to open them up?
Yeah, we might as well just eyeball them. I kind of don't want to get into detail. If people want to, the main thing is to review those and see if you're happy with the position on that. And if you want to refer it to Telecom, please do so. And we'll take that particular issue back to the group to discuss further. So we've got block vote 3. There's some sort of more editorial content kind of conventions material, and block vote 4 is there's a whole set related to the medications list profile exclusively. So if you're kind of interested in that subject matter, that's a good set to go through as well. So we hopefully have discussed this with some of the people raising the tickets. So hopefully they're happy. But it's it'd be good to review those and refer anything back to the group if you think there is more discussion needed.
All right, these two block votes closes on the 1st of November. So please put your vote in.
Yeah.
All right.
That's
coming back to item number 5 then.
All right. So we're back into ballot reconciliation items. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you want to go through them, shall you drive them? The items easier for you.
Yeah, I can do
I'll
that.
stop sharing and then let you share and drive.
Let me share. Sharing. Cool. So we've got a couple of sex and gender related items at the top of the list. There's some related work happening in AU Core, and they really wanted to get our position on these ones to kind of feed into that discussion.
Brett?
Yeah.
Do you mind if we hold those two off to the very end? Andy's just let me know that he can join at 11 and he's keen to be part of that discussion.
Okay. That's good as long as we get to them.
He's fine with us doing them if we finish up earlier, but just in case he can make it. Thanks.
All right. So that's Andy Bond, yeah?
That's Andy Bond.
All right, because I was going to say we could go back to service requests, but I probably like Andy Bond on that one too.
I guess editorial then.
So editorial, yep. So we can we'll skip ahead to these last 3 and then come back as we can to get more input in as much as possible. Cool. Yeah, hopefully these are reasonably digestible. So Ruben raised this one. Let people have a quick look. So it might be good to look at the I don't know, Ruben, did you want to maybe we look at the actual content and
looking at this, I think the crux of this issue is that we have an informative page which has conformance requirements, which is generally not the way to do things. So
So
just
it's the
suggesting
wording.
rewriting
Yeah.
it, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the ticket itself, we looked at that, and I think we ended up agreeing with that and have some proposed words to be altered.
Yeah,
So
and I'm
taking...
comfortable with those revisions. I'm not
Yeah,
too
so-
sure where the mod aspect of this comes in, though.
Oh, I suppose we just put our own words in there. So
yeah, you're not using
Is,
my suggested words.
yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah. So I think it was this kind of part here, wasn't it, where it was shall be present and how they shall be used.
Exactly.
And, yeah. So I think the ticket refines those words or changes those words to lose that language. Yeah, so it loses the sort of conformance language.
Yep.
Yeah.
If there's no other clarifications required, I'm happy to move we accept the resolution as stated.
All right. We have Ruben moving to accept the disposition as worded. Anyone wants to second that?
I will second that.
Okay, Brett, second that. All right. Anyone who has any further comments or questions? Okay, hearing none, let's set up a polling for members to vote on.
There we go.
All right, polling is up.
Just got 70%, 80%.
All right, so we have the same number. If counting you, Brett, then we have 10 for, and then we have 1 abstain. So the motion carried.
Cool.
Shirley, you capture that?
Yep. So
Okay,
was
cool.
that 10 affirmative?
Yeah, 10 affirmative, 1 abstain.
Lovely.
So the no negative, so the motion carried.
Good.
Cool. Excellent.
So the next one.
So that's that one. Yep. So next one we've got. Sorry, slowly loading. Okay. Okay, this is on the relationships to other IGs page, which is more sort of informative material. Basically, it was. What were we saying? Oh, I don't know, Ruben, if you want to say what you were saying.
Yeah. So
Yep.
I think the key thing I was trying to point out was that AU Base has relationship with more specifications than the ones that are stated. And specifically, I wanted to call out the core extensions IG, or the extensions pack, THO, and I had a comment about AU CDI as well. I basically said it's not an implementation guide, and I recommend removing it from the diagram, and rather having it addressed in AU core where it belongs.
Cool.
So I think I'm not sure if you want to look at the current page as it stands at the moment.
So
it's that
up here.
It's further down, 5.1, I think. 5.2, sorry, that's it. So that relationship to other IG section. I think it's the one in subsection 5.2. Yeah. So there's no question that there's a relationship with the FHIR standard. It's just AU CDI is, I think, closer to AU core.
Yeah. And I think, the way it was triaged, I think too, we looked at the words here about describing the FHIR standard.
Yeah,
content.
yeah, that's right. I think
and and I think we said
that's
yes,
right.
we'd like to expand on that. So basically, we need to include the specific things Ruben's mentioned, which are like extensions backend THO.
And removing AUCDI
and remove
from
AUCDI as not being a FHIR artifact.
Not an AU-based related thing. Yeah. So I'm comfortable with that disposition, and I move we accept it.
Cool.
All right, we have Ruben motions to accept the disposition as worded. Any seconder?
I was waiting. I will second.
Okay, Brett, I will second that. All right, that's cool. All right. Any other questions on the disposition or any comments? All right, not hearing anything. Then Brett, please set up the polling.
Yeah.
Thank you.
This up. Yep. There you go.
All right, we have 11. So Brett, you managed to vote? Why do we have?
No, I didn't manage to vote. We've got an extra.
We have 11.
participant.
We've got an extra.
Yeah.
I only have 12
add one.
participants on the list.
I think we got one more.
Yeah, Michael Osborne just dropped off.
Michael Osborne. Okay, all right. Okay, thank you. All right.
There you go.
So
plus one. So 12.
Yep. Okay.
12 affirmative, no negative. Yep.
Yep. Motion carried. All good.
Excellent. Okay, so this screen was sorry. So this one was about the diagrams. Hang on. eRequest. Yeah, so this was a comment about the relationship shown on the diagrams on the relationships with other IGs page. Yeah, so there's a number of things there, I think. So just saying eRequest may refer to AU base directly. The diagrams imply that AU base can only refer to AU core, and provided directory is not current. So I think there's a few items there, but let's just look at the content. So we've got essentially it's referring to this diagram and showing this layout of layers.
Right, is it that diagram or the pyramid diagram?
We don't have the pyramid diagram.
No, but eRequesting has the pyramid diagram. Is it related to that in eRequesting?
I think that's a different. That's a different ticket. Actually, it's referring
What's the related section in the tracker item?
Yeah, it's eRequesting figure 1.
So why is it in ours?
So this was
looking at this?
Yeah, this isn't the right forum for this ticket, I don't think.
Was it formally referred?
Yeah,
was it referred? Because the link is going to the eRequesting IG.
Yeah, I think the idea was that because this applies across all the IGs, right? So AU core has the same diagram. I think maybe base doesn't, but AU core and eRequesting has the same diagram. So and that's why it was being referred here.
And we did discuss this because it does go across all the specs. So I think, this was referred to the FHIR Work Group because effectively whatever decision would be carried across.
Yeah, so be consistent
material.
across eRequesting, AU Core, and AU Base. So looking for
Yeah.
consistency on this.
So, so it does cover.
Oh, let's see which diagram it's referring to then.
Yeah,
bigger one.
I think it's both.
Yeah, I think it is both.
Yeah. So there was some unhappiness about this representation as not reflecting the relationship fully, in the sense that eRequesting might depend on a base or FHIR directly, and so there was some difficulty that this was not referring to things completely. And also in this diagram, similarly, because these are stacked, some thought that that's what the purpose was. And so there was a triage on this, and this is where we landed. So I guess this would be good to open discussion is, so that we thought the diagram wasn't that bad in terms of it was just showing the narrowing of focus on layers. Didn't really wasn't an architectural diagram that was meant to reflect that relationship entirely. But we proposed that we said this is not adding a lot of value, and we would happily have the stacked pyramid diagram removed entirely. Basically it's not necessary as such. So it would mean we lose the stacked pyramid. However, in the next figure, the context figure, the primary reason for this was to show the specificity of the specifications, more or less restrictive, and so that the concept there was to show that. We weren't trying to imply a particular relationship between the things in the layers. So we ended up, I think there were some complaints about the width of the elements and things like that. Provided directory is still technically a HL7 Australia spec, so I don't think we need to discard that. Our kind of change to that was to change the caption. What did we say? Context of AU question within the set of HL7 AU standards. I don't think that's changing very much. It looks like, I think maybe.
Had you seen the ones that Andy mocked up for his suggestions on these diagrams, or was that part of the triage?
Yes, it was part of the triage.
No, that's good. Just making sure you got them. Yeah,
and we definitely didn't want to do that. So primarily, it's really like losing the pyramid diagram, as it's apparently causing some angst, and we didn't think their value was necessarily there. The second diagram was really trying to show how specific the standards were, moving, sort of in, different levels to show the different levels. And we have provided directories in HL7 Australia project still at this point. So it, it was just listed there as context as well. So that's where we landed. So I guess it's probably worth opening to discussion to say any other approaches or.
Yeah, Steph's got something in the chat.
Steph put a chat in and suggesting that perhaps considering an entity relationship diagram.
I think we're kind of wandering off what the point of the page was, because it was meant to be kind of contextual material. I think so I think that's more, like what the actual purpose of the page was meant to be. We already have dependencies available, which essentially shows relationships to packages, which is really the formal dependencies, which is all
I
pretty
think
much
it is conceptual too. Like, we're not trying to be architecturally accurate here. It is conceptual, like you've said there, Steph, in the second half. It's understandable by a wider audience, right? It's just the understanding the concept.
Yeah, so it was, whilst we're trying to be helpful, I'm not sure we achieved necessarily the clarity on that. Yeah, good.
Is the recommendation to like removing that first figure 1 and the text that goes with it, or is it just the
actually
diagram?
that's a good question, because I don't know if we can do one without the other.
Because there is
downstream IGs, like keep it generic.
But
but we're trying to.
But the second diagram, figure 2, doesn't have any text with it, so I think we need some.
Yeah.
Or is that 3.31? So.
No, I think some. I mean, some of the texts are under figure 1 would need to be tweaked, and then some and maybe to go with the figure 2 that then becomes figure 1. And
it's probably. Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think because it's just describing what each of the boxes are, right? The FHIR standard, AU base, AU core, use case IGs. They're just descriptive of what each of the things are. So they still apply. Although the use case IGs, that's still right. Yeah.
In fact,
and the laying balances relative adoption, importance, maturity, and requirements of the use case involved. Maybe it's only that last sentence, if anything.
Yeah. So it's probably this first sentence that would also go. Maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's kind of the setup for this diagram.
Yeah, so in that case, then
so we'd just be left with
the disposition will be figure 1 will be removed, and figure 2 the caption would need to change, and then some descriptions are to be included to describe figure 2, which will become figure 1 better. So that's my understanding of what the disposition is.
What kind of? So can we expand on what would change, if there's any need for change in the text?
I think just the caption goes from figure 2 to figure 1 because the old figure 1's gone.
All right, that's pretty explicit. Okay, so if I was to, actually, I should raise distribution. So, action. So the change caption. This will actually be figure 1, and okay, so this ends up just being remove first line of text and figure 1. Sure that caption's clear.
Yeah.
Change that, and we found that number space here.
Do we also want to make the recommendation this would apply across all the the IGs, so that it's consistent?
The postman has arrived.
Someone at the door?
Yeah.
Well, maybe the doc disagrees with the
Yeah, the one negative. Cool.
Downstream, because maybe, do we want to be explicit about which IDs it's going to apply to?
Oh, good.
Or HOS and AU.
Yeah, that's
cover
right. Let's do what we know. AU core and AU eRequesting.
And AU base.
Yeah, we don't have that diagram.
You don't have that diagram? I thought you.
No, we don't. We don't
sorry.
have the layers. Okay. Yeah. So I don't think we need to do anything for AU base. Maybe I should check. Yeah, no change for AU base. I might note that.
Does AU base need a relationship to other IDs? But sorry, don't open a can of worms.
Don't say that.
I'll take that comment back.
You can comment on the next ballot.
Yep.
Okay.
You have 2 IGs on your first bullet point.
Oh. What did I say?
Right? You have 2 IGs, 5 IGs to be consistent.
Change it. Cool.
All right, all good. So
I was confused then. I was going, yeah, there are 2 IGs.
Are we satisfied with the disposition? Anyone has any questions, any comments? If not, then I will entertain a motion.
I will move that.
All right, Brett, make a motion to accept the disposition as worded.
I'll second
Any
that.
seconder?
Yeah, I'll second it.
All right, Michael, thank you. Michael Wilson. All right, any further questions or comments? All right, not hearing any, then Brett, please launch a poll. Thank you.
Fire that up, yep. Well, that's good. Got 8 out of 9.
All right, the poll seems to have stopped there.
Yep.
We have 8 I4, 1 abstain, and the motion still passed with no oppositions.
Cool.
All right.
Excellent.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we've been
all
efficient.
Right. Well, we finished those editorial ones. So do we need to wait for Andy before we can progress any one of those?
Yeah, look, I'm happy to start with the sex and gender stuff, and Andy can join when he does. If we can just start with the first one at the top,
cool.
Brett.
Here we go. So this is
so reading this again and reading the disposition, Brett, I'm on the one hand not happy with finding this not persuasive, but at the same time I also concede that to actually resolve this properly is going to take more time than we have. So I'm happy to explain what I'm getting at here, but I'm happy to motion that we defer this to a future release of AU Base so that more time can be spent coming up with the sort of guidance and potential example value set binding that would be appropriate to resolve this.
So it's mainly just having more explicit guidance. Yeah.
That's right.
All right. So what do we? Oh, this is our narrative section we have so far.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we get too much. We talk about the things we do have considered.
So I think at the international level, the RSG extension binds the value data element to administrative gender. And it kind of stops there. I think it's an example binding. We specialize that further, I think, for in AU core. And it just seemed a bit sparse yet to be overly useful. But as I said, to come up with something a bit more concrete will require a bit of thinking and discussion. So I'd rather not rule this as not persuasive until we actually have a more concrete approach to this.
Yeah. So do you think we would end up with a profile?
Well, I think one of two things could happen. They could do more work on this extension at the international level, in which case we don't have to do anything.
Sure.
The other thing we could do is, come up with a bit more guidance or constraints for Australia, and maybe that will be born out of implementer feedback and experience. So I do think guidance here is required, but because I don't think we've got time to figure out exactly what that is at this point, I think we should defer this for the next version of AU Base.
Yeah, I think that sounds fair to me. Because I think we could definitely give more advice. I mean, we do. We've got some supporting value sets.
Yeah, for all the other elements, just not RSG.value.
Yeah. But I think we'll have to work on it. I mean, I'd be happy with that because I've certainly thought we should maybe move towards having
Richard, your mic is off mute.
Sorry, it was.
Okay, back to you, Brett.
Cool. Yeah. I was just hoping. Yeah, I thought perhaps we would end up with a profile an extension profile that included our bindings basically, which kind of makes sense because then
look, that may form part of this in the future. Yep.
Yeah. So I think I'd be happy with a motion to turn this into a consider for future use activity.
Are you moving?
I will move that.
Okay. Now second.
All right, we have Brett, motion, and Ruben second. So this ticket is triaged to be for future use or future consideration. All right, let anyone who has any further questions or comments to add. Okay, hearing none, Brett, can you please launch a poll? Thank you.
Here we go. Okay. Got 10 out of 11.
All right, we have 1 abstentions, 10 for. So the motion carries.
Cool. So I'm just going to change this to consider for future use. Put some words in here that make sense. I was going to say what this will be explored. Is that good enough for people? I think we just need to talk about it.
Yeah.
Cool. That's done. Yep, go Richard.
Decision is to consider for further use. How would that further
Future
consideration
use.
be done? Would that be done as a different issue or as other work processes?
No. We'll keep this. Essentially, this issue continues on to be considered, and we'll either make it a work item or
Okay, right. So it's
basically
triage,
won't get closed. Yeah, it won't get closed as being non-persuasive. Yeah. So I think this is definitely worthwhile. Looking at if we could or should expand further, because we have some material in AU Core as well that may be part of this discussion, I think, in terms of what should belong where. But I think that's it. Cool. We can move on. Another ticket. So we have A-based patient should clarify that patient gender is regarded as a recorded sex or gender value. So
Do you need me to speak to this one, Brett?
Yes, please.
I
can, but I'll put words in your mouth and they won't be the right words. Yeah.
Okay, so gosh, where to start with this? So first of all, in the core FHIR standard in R4, there is the long-standing patient.gender data element, which is explicitly defined as administrative gender, and further goes on to state that IGs that adopt this, the resource type and this element need to be clear on what precise semantics it actually carries. I raised this ticket because it's my belief that with the introduction of the gender harmony elements, notably gender identity and recorded sex or gender, RSG, we now have a really great opportunity to finally clarify what AU Base's position is on patient.gender. And it is my very firm belief that we have to regard it as an RSG value. And just for those that are new to all of this, all RSG is saying is that a sex or gender value cannot be relied upon to accurately tell someone what a consumer's gender identity is. And it also cannot be relied upon to give someone sex for clinical use. Now, noting the way administrative gender is defined and how people use it, I think it's really pretty clear that you can't rely on it as gender identity or sex for clinical use. And more to the point, in AU Base, we now have explicit elements for gender identity and elsewhere for sex parameter for clinical use. And further to this, the RSG extension now actually allows you to make an assertion that the attributes of an RSG value convey the semantics that should be associated with patient.gender. So for all of these reasons, I think if we don't clarify this here now, we are going to lead to a lot of semantic overlap, inconsistency, and hopefully not clinical safety problems. So if we make the clear statement that you cannot rely on patient.gender to be an accurate gender identity or sex parameter for clinical use, I think the specification will overall benefit from that clarification. And that's what I've called for here. And accordingly, I reject the proposed disposition on this, which doesn't find my suggestion persuasive. And happy to take questions.
Landon?
I guess my question is it just the note change? So it's just a text change with guidance. Is that the extent of this change?
So I guess it will go into where the profile is defined, Landon. I'm not sure if there's a column alongside patient.gender that you can add a comment or a clarification or something, which I'm arguing we should have a statement which is something to the effect of patient.gender is regarded as a recorded sex or gender value.
So
So that's the ask, I guess.
Yeah, because I think at the moment this is our.
So you can have comments either in this table or in the elements further down. Not sure where exactly it would. Is this the snapshot you're looking at? Or are you looking at key elements?
No, this is the differential because we have nothing to say about gender at the moment. Yeah.
So if you look at some of the other elements where we do say things,
we do.
There's an invariant that says something about RSG. I missed the details, but up the top there's an invariant that says something about RSG.
Yeah, there are, because it's about.
There we go. Yeah. So I guess I'm saying we should have something which firmly states a position in terms of how that patient.gender element is regarded or should be regarded by systems populating it or consuming it.
So we could have, patient.gender is, I guess, administrative gender?
That's what the core spec says. Well, the core spec says a couple of things. It does say that it's administrative gender, but it also, there's a really big paragraph there about all the different ways it can be interpreted, which really just adds weight to the argument that it's quite unreliable as gender identity.
So you're reading this saying that patient.gender could also be one of these others, while I have that as saying that here are some other things which patient.gender is not a good source, a good thing for.
Sorry, can you just repeat the whole statement there, Richard? I missed the first part.
My reading was my reading of this, and I may be unusual in this, was to say that here are some other things related to gender which patient.gender is not suited for. That's the way I'd read that list.
I kind of read it that here are more specific things you could do with sex and gender.
Yeah, that could be represented in that field. Yeah, exactly.
My thinking was that, and these are things you wouldn't put in this field. So that's interesting. Now, given that this can be read as saying, you can also stick these things in patient.gender.
Exactly.
Yeah, I agree that we should say no, it is a really bad idea to stick these things in patient.gender.
Richard, I agree with your interpretation. When I read the first sentence after the administrative gender, I've never interpreted that you can stick everything else listed below into administrative gender. I've never would have interpreted it that way.
But if you read the sentence, Stephen, it says, in addition to this administrative gender, other kinds of sex and gender properties may be represented. I don't see that as ambiguous or in any way exclusionary.
It's not
in addition to admin gender, it could be clinical sex, clinical gender, etc., etc.
In that case,
may be represented in this data element. I took it as being maybe represented in a patient resource.
No,
in that case, then my suggestion is remove the first part of the sentence. In addition to this administrative gender.
Sorry, Stephen, we're looking at the core spec. We can't change that. This is the core spec. This is not in AU Base.
We can clarify in our one, but this is core.
Well,
So I think I get Ruben's point, because it's like it basically where it lands is administrative gender is administrative gender. It doesn't necessarily mean anything.
Exactly.
And it's so in some ways saying it's a recorded sex or gender makes sense, because it's I mean, that's what it is, and it might be any of these flavors explicitly, but you would have to state that explicitly. I guess if you wanted to say that.
I mean, by accepting my proposal, all you're effectively doing is saying that this is definitely not gender identity, and it's definitely not sex for clinical use. That's the effect of regarding patient.gender as an RSG value. It doesn't exclude all of these other uses. It just makes it unreliable as gender identity and unreliable as sex for clinical use.
Yeah. Is it?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. Go on.
Is there a way to assert it as gender identity?
No.
If you
Well,
wanted
I
to?
mean, you wouldn't want to do that because we've already got the gender harmony, gender identity element in the AU-based patient profile. So that's the correct thing to use if you wanted to assert gender identity.
Yeah, so
Which
we are
is
actually
safe.
saying you can't use it for gender identity.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's the bit I think we had trouble with. Yeah.
I think that kind of makes sense. You're not saying you can't, you're saying it's not suitable for in place. It's just guidance, isn't it? Right?
Well, I guess what it's saying in effect is you can put someone's gender identity in there, but you
just
shouldn't
not
expect
reliable.
us processing the data to regard that as reliable.
Yeah,
if you want something to reliably regard it as gender identity, use the gender harmony, gender identity data element, which is there.
Just rather than staying silent, actually giving some.
Yeah, exactly. It's really making things precise and removing ambiguity.
So, I think the way we came out was that's not saying anything different than the base spec.
All right, now I'm going to wrap up this discussion. We're 6 minutes or 7 minutes into the top of the hour, and we have 2 other items to discuss, although I haven't seen Andy showing up as yet, but I think we would like to wrap this one up.
Yeah. So I'm happy to make a motion, Stephen.
All right. So
sorry. I think the words are important because that would be good if you could say what you want to say. Yeah.
Absolutely. Can we go back to the tracker item, Brett?
Let me get the right one.
If you...
That's the wrong
one. Nope.
Yes, that's the right one.
So further down, what I'm saying is the following usage notes should be added, the bullet point at the bottom. And I move that we accept that as the resolution to this tracker item.
Richard, are you trying to say something?
Oh, sorry, I had meant to be muted. I'm just, I'm looking at the definition of patient dot. I completely sympathise with trying to make sure people don't muck this up because it's so commonly mucked up. But if I look at the definition of patient.gender, it says the gender that the patient is considered to have for administrative and record-keeping purposes. Why do we want to say it's RSG rather than just administrative gender?
Because, no, that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is by making it RSG, we're saying that it's definitely not gender identity. So it can be administrative gender. That's fine. But we don't want anyone creating patient instances or processing them and then regarding patient.gender as someone's gender identity or a sex parameter for clinical use. So it could absolutely be administrative gender, however you want to define that, but don't regard it as someone's gender identity. That's the effect of this.
Is saying that it is RSG clear enough for the people who are likely to get this wrong?
I think so, because we go to great lengths to explain what RSG is in the sex and gender page, as well as the extension.
I guess my fear is that the people who will get this wrong are people who won't read the RSG stuff. They'll just say, oh, it's another complicated thing. I'll do what I want.
It's very difficult to design for people who don't read the specs.
Yes.
Well, so I'd rather be very clear and have something that you can then make an argument against improper use for. Right now, we don't have that unless we accept this proposal.
Yeah, so you don't want people to think patient.gender is gender identity, basically.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Well, you could say it's not gender identity and it's not sex defined birth.
I need something far more precise than that, Richard. And by doing it this way, it's it's completely irrefutable.
So I'm just going to be devil's advocate. With Richard's proposal, then there will be no mistake about it. So why do you need to be that specific? You're actually then constraining the interpretation to sex for recorded sex or gender, and leaving people not to sort of think about administrative sex.
So, look, I'm not disagreeing that what Richard is suggesting is not a good idea, and by all means, feel free to add a tracker item about that, Richard. What I'm arguing for here is to make it very clear in what's going on the wire, what's actually happening here. That's all.
So in a sense, it's relaxing the definition to say it doesn't have to be administrative. It can be whatever you've got on your system, which sounds
as long as it's it's actually not restrictive. It's clarifying in the context of AU base. What's in the core spec is just way too ambiguous, given that we have a dedicated gender identity element in AU-based patient.
Oh yeah.
It's just that
I quite understand. This is the value you grab off the passport or the form you filled out, but you don't use it for any decision making. You just
it depends how you run. It depends how you run your administrative process, right? Because I might always put gender identity in the administrative field of my system.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And that's my web purpose, and that's what I consider the administrative gender. But I shouldn't use it as the gender identity. That's not a gender identity.
That's exactly the point.
It's still administrative.
Yeah. That's also exactly.
Yeah. So what? Yeah. Because the thing, like we were looking at it and going, well, we thought what was in the patient admin description described what it was for, and we certainly thought you could use RSG to state an RSG.
Yeah,
which is always available.
In fact, it's helpful to do that because with that gender element qualifier, you can be more explicit about where that value came from.
Yeah, so we kind of we thought that was a good idea. Yeah.
But for me, it's the first part of this that's really crucial, that we need to draw a line in the sand and state that patient.gender must be regarded as an RSG value to prevent confusion as to what should be used for someone's actual gender identity.
I think Richard's proposal has a better merit than what this has been proposed, but I'll leave it to the general consensus.
Yeah, because
I made a motion. Sorry, go on, Brett.
Oh no, I think because we were kind of aiming to say, like what Richard was saying, is don't use it for gender. Don't use it as the gender identity, you should use RSG to explain explicitly what it's for. We think that's a good idea.
And look, absolutely, that can be a different tracker item, which I would support as well. I'm trying to get the mechanics and semantics of this clarified with this tracker item.
So we kind of totally agree with the second sentence.
Well, in the interest of time, I'm making a motion that we accept my proposed disposition in the bullet at the bottom.
All right, you have a motion on the table. Anyone wants to second that?
I'll second that, Puran. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Puran. All right, then anyone who has any further comments in addition to what we have already discussed? Okay.
Sorry, Rich. Sorry, Steve. I think it's a little strong. That's what I think. So, that's my only comment.
Okay, yep, that's fine then. That's why my question of any further sort of suggestion or comment. Do you want to make a friendly amendment to the motion? Your friendly amendment can be just the second sentence.
Honestly, I think if we said the patient gender value could be regarded as a recorded sex or gender value.
Sorry, I don't accept that amendment.
You don't accept I think Ruben wants to motion this. So yeah, so
right.
that would be what I would do if I was amending. I would qualify that first sentence, but yeah, let's go ahead.
All right. Okay. The amendment as a recommendation is rejected. So let's call to the vote. Brett, can you please set up a poll?
Relaunch that. Is it going? Okay, we've got 9.
All right, we have pretty much equal split. Hang on, we have
Sorry.
one
bit more affirmative, yeah.
Sorry, Stephen.
Yep.
I'm confused as what the actual motion was, because it was one thing and then in the last
Yeah.
second you said something else. So.
I can
The
clarify
second
my
motion.
motion.
All right,
So
the
we are
motion.
changing it to those wording?
My motion is that we adopt what's in the highlighted bullet point, Jane, to say that the patient.gender value shall be regarded as a recorded sex or gender value. And if assertions regarding the nature of that value are required, an instance of the RSG extension with the gender element qualifier sub-element included with a value of truth. So it's basically adding that bullet point as a constraint to invariant.
Yeah, that's what I thought. But then just when Stephen put it up, he said something about rejected, and I was like,
No, there was a friendly amendment.
You rejected the amendment.
I rejected the amendment.
Yeah, the rejection is to the amendment that was being suggested. So therefore, the resolution or the disposition still stands with what is highlighted on the screen.
So is everyone happy they recorded the vote they wanted to record?
Do we pop it up again?
Yeah.
We can do it again.
If anyone wants to change the vote, then we will relaunch the poll.
Yeah.
Okay, not hearing any. Jane, have you voted, or do you want to change your vote?
I've just voted, but can we remove the extra A in the second sentence after the comma?
Yep.
Yes.
I accept that amendment.
You accept that amendment?
Call that a typo.
if one can call it that.
Okay. So we finished then. That's good.
So we finished. Yes.
I'm a negative, Stephen. So
yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we have 3 negatives, and then 6 for, and then 4 abstain.
Cool.
All right. Thank you.
Done.
All right.
I thank you all. This is a change.
Okay,
I am so happy we've got through.
I think Andy has joined us. Have we seen Andy coming in? No, we haven't seen Andy on the call. All right, so we don't have Andy on the call. Do we want to continue with those 2, or at least address one of them? We have about 40 minutes left.
Well, we can certainly. I think we should. It's going to be it's going to have a downstream effect on eRequesting, which is why we're kind of hanging around for Andy. But we do have other people. We have a Michael Wilson here, so he's a co-chair now.
Yep, Steph's here too.
So Steph's here, so we can probably still have this discussion and continue. So this was my ticket. We actually did start discussing this one in the last meeting, but didn't get to the end of it. Although I thought we were kind of getting close to coming to an answer. So context, we have a AU-based diagnostic request profile in AU-base. We do not have a general purpose AU-base service request profile, the most general case. So the proposal, hang on, that's the resolution. The proposal was, I kind of left it open-ended, but like either replacing or adding an additional service request. Oh, here's Andy now, perfect timing. Andy, can you hear us?
Unfortunately, I can.
Cool. The Andy. So the service request, the premise was to add a service request profile that's a general purpose AU-based service request, and I suggested replacing diagnostic request, but I think with its current status, that profile would need to be deprecated. So essentially, it ends up being adding a new profile, which is how the ticket was triaged. So the premise here was to deprecate the diagnostic request profile and create a new base profile AU-based service request. Downstream IGs would be able to consider that then as an option to derive from, and the base profile had completely generic kind of purposes. So it would include, so there's some details about what would be in that profile. So an identifier list, including a local order identifier, a requisition identifier, including local order identifier as well, a code binding to a preferred SNOMED value set for procedure, which is kind of a higher level than the diagnostic request binding currently. So that takes in all types of procedures. Performer type. So that was a value set. Just check where that one's come from. I think that was that was a binding strength on participant roles. Reasons, reason for request, and body site, which are kind of like our standard bindings. I see Dave McKillop has a comment, which I'm not surprised since you authored the original. Do you want to say something, David? Or can't hear you?
David, go ahead. We can't hear you, David. David, we can't hear you.
We can see you, but we can't hear you now.
Oh, he said that he will type.
Good luck.
This may take a while. So I am currently using, well, in Magentis I use the existing profile, mainly to get me around the bug in the R4 service request. But it would be useful to know which of these are a carryover and which are either being added to or modifying the existing ones. I don't think I depend on any of them, to be honest.
Yeah. And we've got David's point too.
Yeah,
it might be
David's question is
so I'll bring up the current profile. So this is what we've currently got published. So really, the new proposed service request is the only difference is to change this binding to evaluation procedure. So I think that is, which is also at example level, which I don't think is very helpful either. But that, so to actually add a preferred binding on that code. The rest, I believe, is identical.
Is preferred the next lowest?
Yes, that's the next lowest. Yeah, so that's like not a required binding in any way. It's just indicating a suitable binding. Yeah, so David's point is procedure high enough in the hierarchy in terms of things you might have in a service request? And that's probably a good question. So it's probably good to look at like evaluation procedure.
Beyond diagnostic request, what's other kind of scope that it would be encompassing?
Yeah, so that it would be a change of purpose. So let's link the because the so it would be basically requesting any service, which could include other procedures or services that are needed. So I think that would be so diagnostic request is a specific use case effectively, right? Because it's in diagnostics only.
Might this be used for some other referral that's not a procedure?
Yeah.
Because I'm using it for anesthetic services.
Yeah.
So that's not diagnostic, but I guess that still falls under procedure.
Yeah, so that was so my idea was that we could broaden that or work on terminology. Oh yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I just changed the setting. I was just thinking some of the more service requests like laundry and other things like that, you know?
Yeah, true. Because I was just gonna go and
it's more than that. If you, I don't know whether or not you consider surgical procedure requests as one of those service requests. I would think so. You might want to request a total knee replacement to be done on the patient.
Just anything.
Yeah.
So it's just looking in the hierarchy. So it was kind of moving up the hierarchy. So procedure is here, but I don't know where anything else would live. So it might be a job for a terminologist to say, should there be a ref set here that's covering all the things we want to have?
Or if it truly is going to be generic, do we just not put anything?
Yeah. But it's kind of like whether we can say what is preferred.
At the international level, we have debated sort of a lot over that, and then you have all sorts of procedural requests type of thing being included, including educational requests and patient advisory, counseling requests, that kind of thing. So to constrain it to examination, where you said will be too narrow.
Yeah, maybe. So I guess the question is, does that make sense? I guess there's a couple of questions. Do we want to deprecate AU-based diagnostic request? As I kind of because the way it pans out is I think more and more that's an eRequesting concern, and they define what diagnostic service requests look like. Yeah.
Agreed.
David?
Yeah, I was thinking that the current diagnostic request would probably go to a downstream like AU Core or eRequesting or something like that, and you'd probably create a AU Base generic one, but you'd even just have an example, very broad value set, and just leave it as example just to cover that, and then downstream people can do what they like, just to keep it generic enough to be used for all sorts of sins.
Yeah, because the only sort of AU-based concern I have is that kind of multiple use question about when I want to say something about service requests in a summary in AU Core, say, where do I get my common definition from that is going to be consistent with what, because it might pan out that way anyway. If we did have an AU core service request, I mean, eRequesting might look at that, right? Is another angle.
All right, so where do we land?
I have a question. What does having an AU-based profile here give us? Because it's sort of, it's mentioned a few very broad value sets. I'm just wondering, do we even need the resource?
No, pleased to meet you, Jason.
I like it just as a preferred setting, like preferred bindings to value sets, because these are really, essentially, this is what the downstream specs are going to do.
Right.
In a sense, like
So
they're stronger already. Yeah.
Okay, so the bindings on things like performer type and reason code and are particularly useful. Okay. Yep.
As are the identifiers.
Yeah.
Oh, you did. Oh.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, identifiers just has mentioned identifier. That's useful. Okay, that's good. I just wanting to make sure that it doesn't become so weak that we don't need it at all. It's still useful. That's nice to know.
Yeah, if you could, we're kind of just doing a service request. I'd say, yeah, if you're looking at the element, we want you to use that terminology. It's kind of like that would be if you were coming at it from nothing, and this would be a good way to go. Yeah, and you would be pretty much aligned then with other work.
But isn't there some value in having weak placeholder profiles so that if you've got something you come back to later on that you just want to add into, rather than having to create something and then everybody rederives off that. You know what I mean? So even if it is weak, you include it, and then so you've got something to refine later on if and when the cause comes. Arrives.
Yeah, and I think there's actually, like, I think people are reasonably, like with the eRequesting work, people are happy enough with the current diagnostic request profile because it meets the diagnostic request purpose of eRequesting at the moment, right? So it actually is pretty aligned to what has been discussed in there. The premise I had was to essentially move the whole diagnostic request definition into eRequesting, where you need to do diagnostic request business, and make a more generic profile that could be used elsewhere. But it is a good question about the sharing part of the exercise, because it's like at some point AU Core might want to represent diagnostic requests, right? And in terms of a summary of those, and so how do you kind of get this information shared between the specs? The generic one was really more just to put the things we did know had good bindings in one place so that they would go throughout the usage everywhere. So the only thing I think is, I think mostly the bindings are okay with everyone except for code, which we kind of would need to work out what that would be.
Yeah, I think that sets a precedent for the focus of the whole thing, because I think as Dave McKillop said, like, if we are kind of directing it towards procedures, then the argument is it's more a procedure request. But I'd rather be more general. And I, to Dave McKillop, use this technique, or I use the technique of kind of having a profile as a placeholder, because it's too hard to inject new profiles all of the time. So even if it's got just a skeleton, I often do it.
So we are at time, or 3 minutes past time, or 4 minutes past time. So do we have a way of landing it, or shall we table it for the next meeting? Probably, I think to be fair to other participants, we have gone past an hour and a half. So we either try to land it in the next couple of minutes, or we will have to table it for the next discussion.
I think I might have a chat to a few people, and maybe we'll table it and try and come back with a more specific proposal, but that was, I think, a helpful discussion. So that was good.
Yep, sounds like a plan. In that case, then, Brett, there is an action item on Brett, who will get on to some one-to-one discussions with a number of key stakeholders, and then come back with some suggestions for discussion at the next meeting.
Terrific.
All right, with that, then I will entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Yes, let's go.
Thanks all.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
We'll reconvene at the next meeting. All right. Thanks.
Thanks for sharing, Steve. Cheers.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.